The mansion glowed like a palace under the evening lights, its glass walls reflecting the manicured gardens and the glittering pool that stretched toward the horizon. Inside, everything was arranged to perfection. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases, the scent of lilies filling the air, while priceless paintings hung on the walls like silent witnesses to a life of wealth and status. The millionaire husband, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, carried the aura of a man who had conquered the world. His pregnant wife, glowing in a silk gown, smiled at him with quiet devotion as she gently rested a hand on her rounded belly. To any observer, they were the perfect couple, successful, enviable, untouchable. Everywhere they went, people admired them. At charity events, they arrived arm in arm, the husband offering a polite smile to the cameras while the wife charmed donors with her grace. Tabloids celebrated their marriage as a fairy tale. He, a self-made millionaire with international business ventures, and she, a woman of elegance and kindness. Together, they were photographed stepping out of luxury cars, dining at the most exclusive restaurants, and vacationing on private islands. The world believed their love story was flawless, a dream most could never achieve. And she believed it too. At least, she wanted to. At home, her days were filled with gentle anticipation. She decorated the nursery with care, choosing soft colors, plush toys, and a rocking chair by the window where she imagined singing lullabies to their child. She carefully planned meals, choosing healthy recipes, and sometimes laughed when her husband teased her about her new cravings. At night, she would talk to the baby, whispering about the beautiful life waiting for them, about the father who would shower them both with love. She felt safe in her golden world, convinced that her husband adored her and their unborn child. But beneath the glitter, shadows lingered. The husband was often away, locked in late-night meetings or business trips that stretched longer than promised. His phone buzzed at odd hours, and though he smiled reassuringly, he would step out of the room to answer calls in hushed tones. When she asked, he brushed off her questions with a kiss on the forehead or a playful remark about how she worried too much. At first, she accepted it. After all, men with empires to run often carried secrets. But slowly, she began to notice how his eyes seemed distant even when he was home, how he lingered on messages with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sometimes, when she sat alone in the nursery, a flicker of unease touched her heart. She would silence it with thoughts of love and trust, convincing herself that their story was stronger than doubt. Yet deep within, a quiet fear began to take root, a sense that the flawless picture might not be as unbreakable as it seemed. The world saw perfection, and she clung to it desperately, unaware that the cracks were already forming beneath the polished surface. The night began like any other, quiet and serene inside the mansion. The wife had settled into bed early, her body exhausted from carrying the weight of her pregnancy. A soft lamp cast a warm glow across the room, and the faint hum of the city outside was a comforting reminder of the life they had built together. Her husband had excused himself, saying he needed to take an important business call in his office. She kissed him lightly on the cheek and wished him good night, thinking nothing of it. After all, late calls had become normal in their household. She curled onto her side, her hand resting on her belly, and closed her eyes with a small smile, whispering a promise to her unborn child that tomorrow would be another beautiful day. Minutes passed, and her phone buzzed lightly on the nightstand. When she reached for it, she noticed his name flashing on the screen. Curious, she swiped to answer, expecting perhaps that he had dialed her by accident. She pressed the phone to her ear, ready to tell him he had called the wrong line, but then froze when she heard his voice. He hadn't realized the line was still open. At first, the conversation sounded harmless. He spoke in a low tone, the way he did during negotiations. She thought it might be another business partner, maybe even a close friend. But then, the tone shifted, his words softened, his voice carrying warmth she hadn't heard directed at her in weeks. A gentle chuckle, followed by the unmistakable sound of flirtation, slipped through the receiver. Her heart skipped a beat. She held the phone tighter, pressing it against her ear as though clarity could change what she was hearing. The woman on the other end laughed, a sultry, playful sound that sent a chill racing down the wife's spine. "You're impossible," the stranger teased. "What if she finds out?" "She won't," her husband replied, his voice dripping with confidence. "She's too busy with the baby to notice anything. Besides, She trusts me blindly. You're the one who keeps me alive, you're my escape. The wife's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so violently she could feel it in her fingertips. She wanted to hang up, to throw the phone across the room and erase the words before they reached her soul, but she couldn't. Her body was frozen, her ear locked to the device as though it had turned into a weapon that stabbed deeper with every syllable. The mistress giggled again. When will it be just us? I hate hiding. I want the world to know you're mine. Patience, darling, he whispered. Soon. Let me get through this phase with her. After the baby, I'll make sure everything falls into place. I promise, you'll have all of me. She'll have nothing. Tears streamed silently down the wife's cheeks, soaking her pillow. The words sliced through her like glass, each promise to the other woman cutting away at the life she thought she had. She wanted to scream, to storm into his office and demand the truth, but her voice had abandoned her. The betrayal felt too sharp, too immediate, leaving her paralyzed in a haze of disbelief. Her fingers trembled as she lowered the phone, but she couldn't bring herself to end the call. She listened to every hushed word, every laugh, every careless declaration of love that was meant for someone else. For the first time, she felt like an outsider in her own marriage, a spectator to a secret world that had been unfolding right under her nose. When the line finally went silent, she lay in the darkness, her body trembling uncontrollably. She clutched her stomach, whispering to her unborn child that everything would be okay, though she knew she no longer believed it herself. Her perfect world had shattered in an instant, and the man she thought she knew had become a stranger. Her world spun in silence after the call ended, the heavy stillness of the room pressing against her chest like a suffocating weight. The once soothing glow of the bedside lamp now felt mocking, illuminating the tears that streaked her face and the hollow ache in her eyes. She sat upright, clutching the sheets in her fists, her body trembling uncontrollably. Every word from that call replayed in her mind like a broken record, looping endlessly, cutting deeper each time. The flirtatious laughter, his hushed promises, the cruel dismissal of her role in his life. It all clanged in her ears, louder than any scream. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, fingers splayed protectively over the small swell that carried her child. For a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes, as if she could anchor herself to the life growing inside her, a life untouched by betrayal. The baby's faint movement, a flutter beneath her palm, reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. But even that comfort felt fragile, like holding onto a thread while dangling over an abyss. Denial clawed at her mind, desperate to shield her from the agony. Maybe she misunderstood, maybe it was just a harmless joke, maybe the stress of pregnancy was making her overthink. But the truth was undeniable. She had heard every word, every vow he had made to the other woman, vows that had once been hers. She shook her head violently as though she could fling the memory away, but it clung to her like a second skin. Tears streamed endlessly, soaking her nightgown, her sobs muffled against the palm she pressed to her mouth. She feared making a sound, feared he might walk in and see her shattered like this. The image of his face, so calm and affectionate in public, twisted in her mind into a mask of cruelty. How could the same man who held her hand at doctor's appointments and whispered to her belly at night also speak such venom behind her back? Her chest tightened, panic seizing her as though the walls of the mansion were closing in. She rose from the bed and staggered toward the window, needing air, needing proof the world outside still existed. The city lights blinked faintly in the distance, indifferent to her agony. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her tears blurring the skyline. To the world, she was the picture of a perfect wife in a perfect marriage. To herself, she was now nothing more than a prop in his grand charade. Her knees buckled, and she slid down to the floor, her arms wrapping protectively around her belly as sobs racked her body. "I'll protect you," she whispered to her unborn child, her voice trembling, broken. "Even if he won't. Even if everything else falls apart." The words were a vow, born from both despair and defiance, though her heart felt like it was splitting into shards. Every corner of the room reminded her of him. His cologne on the pillows, his watch on the nightstand, his suit jacket draped casually over the chair. She wanted to destroy it all, to erase every trace of him, but her body was too weak, her spirit too broken. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, caught between denial and truth, between love and loathing. That night marked the death of her innocence. The life she thought she had, the security, the devotion, the happily ever after, was nothing but a facade. And though her tears eventually slowed, her heart knew the truth would never be silenced again. The cracks in her perfect life had burst wide open, and no amount of pretending could mend them. The sound of the garage door groaning open jolted her from the sofa where she had been sitting in darkness, clutching a pillow like a shield. Her eyes, swollen from crying, burned as the headlights of his sleek car swept across the living room window. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway gnawed at her nerves until finally, the front door clicked open. He stepped inside, smelling of expensive cologne and faintly of wine, his tie loosened, his expression calm, even smug, as though he'd just returned from another victorious night. She rose slowly, her body trembling, though her voice was steadier than she expected. "Where were you?" He glanced at her, a flicker of irritation flashing in his eyes. "Late dinner meeting. You should be asleep." His tone was clipped, dismissive, like he was brushing off an irrelevant detail. Her chest tightened. "Don't lie to me. I heard you." For a moment, he froze, his eyes narrowing as though calculating what she meant. "Heard what?" "The call," she said, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay strong. "You forgot to hang up." "I heard you." With her. Her hand pressed against her stomach unconsciously, as though her child could feel the quake in her voice. He chuckled, actually chuckled, as he tossed his keys onto the table. "You're imagining things. Stress, hormones. You've been so emotional lately." His words dripped with condescension, each one slicing her dignity apart. Her tears welled again, but she stood her ground. "Don't you dare blame this on my pregnancy. I know what I heard. You've been lying to me." His smile twisted into a sneer. "Even if I were," he paused, savoring the power in his words. "What does it matter? You have everything women dream of. A mansion, cars, a husband with money and status. You should be grateful instead of snooping and whining." Her knees nearly buckled, the cruelty in his tone cutting deeper than the call itself. "Grateful?" she whispered. "Grateful that my husband betrays me while I carry his child?" His face hardened. "Don't raise your voice at me," he snapped, stepping closer. The arrogance in his posture was suffocating, his shadow looming over her. "You think without me, you'd have this life? You'd be nothing. Nobody would even know your name." Her heart pounded, rage and pain battling inside her. "I don't care about the cars, the house, or the name. I cared about you. I loved you." Her voice cracked under the weight of the truth. His eyes darted away for a moment, then returned, cold and unyielding. "Love doesn't pay for private doctors or silk sheets. Face it, you'll never leave me. Where would you go? Who would take you, pregnant and fragile? You're trapped, and you know it." The words slammed into her like a hammer, but instead of crushing her, they sparked something inside her, a flicker of defiance she hadn't felt in years. She straightened her back, her hand still firm on her belly. "Don't underestimate me. I may be carrying your child, but I will not let you destroy me. Or us." For the first time, his composure cracked, a flash of unease in his eyes. He masked it quickly, scoffing as he strode past her toward the stairs. "Go to bed. You're hysterical." She stood frozen, every muscle taut, listening to his footsteps echo up the staircase. The mansion felt colder than ever, yet her heart blazed with a new resolve. He thought she was weak, thought she'd bow under the weight of his wealth and cruelty. But his arrogance had given her clarity. She would uncover the truth, piece by piece, no matter how painful. When the bedroom door slammed shut upstairs, she sank into the silence, devastated but no longer paralyzed. He had shown her who he truly was, and though the confrontation left her heart shattered, it had also planted a seed of determination. She would find the truth. She would protect her child. And when the time came, she would make sure he could never call her powerless again. The wife's sleepless nights began to blur into one another, each hour haunted by echoes of her husband's cruel words. Yet instead of allowing despair to drown her, she clung to a fragile strand of resolve. If he thought she would accept his betrayal in silence, he was wrong. She needed truth, solid proof that his arrogance could not twist or dismiss. Quietly, she reached out to a trusted investigator, an old friend of her father's who had long specialized in discreet inquiries for the wealthy. She knew it was a risk, but the weight of her unborn child pressed against her ribs like a reminder. She had no choice but to uncover the truth. Within days, the investigator returned with details that cut sharper than glass. The mistress wasn't just any woman. She was a young socialite, barely in her late 20s, who thrived on attention, luxury, and the thrill of being attached to powerful men. Pictures arrived first, photographs of her husband leaving exclusive restaurants with her, attending art shows under the guise of business, and slipping into hotels where no meetings were scheduled. Each image was a dagger, proof that their marriage had been a stage while the true play unfolded elsewhere. But it wasn't only the betrayal that broke her, it was the casual cruelty she discovered in their exchanges. Recordings, discreetly obtained, revealed snippets of their conversations. Her heart nearly stopped when she heard the mistress's voice, sultry and mocking, dripping disdain as she laughed about the pregnant wife. "She's so boring now," the mistress purred. "Weak. Always tired, always complaining. I almost feel sorry for her, waddling around like that while you're with me." The wife pressed her hand to her stomach, fury and anguish colliding in her chest. Worse still, the mistress knew about the pregnancy. She mocked it, even reveled in it, using it as ammunition to bind the millionaire closer to her. "Let her carry your heir," she sneered in one call. "It only makes you freer with me. She can play mommy while I stay your queen." The wife's breath hitched, every syllable a cruel twist in her gut. To think that not only had he betrayed her, but he had shared their most intimate joy, their child, with someone who despised her. As the wife sat in her study, papers and photographs spread across the desk, the truth stood undeniable. This wasn't a fleeting fling. It was a calculated affair, months in the making, fueled by lust and arrogance, sustained by her husband's lies and the mistress's manipulative charm. The perfect life she had built in her mind shattered again, this time beyond repair. And yet, amidst the pain, something shifted within her. No longer was she merely a victim of deception. Knowledge gave her power, a weapon her husband had never expected her to wield. She wiped her tears, her jaw setting in quiet defiance. The mistress could laugh all she wanted, but the wife knew one thing for certain: this game wasn't over. The father had always been a man of few words, the kind whose silence carried more weight than the speeches of others. As one of the country's most respected businessmen, he had built his empire on sharp instincts, and those instincts now told him that something was terribly wrong with his daughter. He saw it in the faint shadows under her eyes, in the forced smiles she offered during family dinners, and in the way her hands lingered protectively over her stomach as though shielding not just her child, but herself. She tried to mask her pain, brushing off his gentle questions with claims of fatigue from pregnancy. Yet he knew his daughter too well. The laughter that once came so easily now sounded rehearsed, and her once radiant glow seemed dimmed by an invisible weight. Each time her husband's name was mentioned, her eyes clouded with something unspoken, something heavy. The father said nothing, but his mind began to piece the puzzle together. One evening, after she excused herself early from the table, he remained seated, his wine glass untouched, his gaze fixed on the doorway she had disappeared through. His jaw tightened. He had raised her to be strong, but he also knew the kind of pride and silence women often carried in the face of betrayal. And if her husband thought his power or money could protect him from accountability, he was sorely mistaken. Quietly, the father began making calls. Trusted allies, discreet investigators, lawyers who owed him favors, he summoned them with the same calm precision he used in business deals. He asked questions, traced movements, and pulled at threads his daughter was too heartbroken to follow herself. Piece by piece, the truth began to form in the shadows, a story of arrogance, infidelity, and cruelty. To the world, he remained the calm patriarch, offering his daughter quiet comfort with his presence, never pressing her to confess more than she was ready to share. But behind that composed exterior simmered a storm. He was not just a father, he was a man who had clawed his way to power in a ruthless world, and no one, least of all a son-in-law who dared betray his daughter, would walk away unscathed. His silence was not weakness. It was the warning before the strike, the stillness before thunder split the sky. And though his daughter could not yet see it, her father's quiet watch was already setting in motion a reckoning that would change everything. The gala glittered with excess, chandeliers scattering golden light across marble floors and gowns that shimmered like jewels. Music floated through the air, mingling with the clinking of glasses and the laughter of the city's elite. At the center of it all stood the millionaire, his arm firmly looped around his wife's as they posed for photographers. To the crowd, they looked flawless, the successful husband and his glowing, expectant wife, the picture of stability and grace. Cameras flashed, and she forced a smile, the same kind she had practiced countless times, hiding the storm churning within her. He was attentive just enough to convince onlookers. Pulling out her chair, offering her champagne she quietly refused, brushing his hand along the small of her back. But she felt the hollowness in his gestures, the distance in his eyes. She had learned to read the gaps in his affection, the places where sincerity should have lived. And as the evening wore on, she caught the subtle glances he stole toward the far side of the room. The mistress was there, radiant in a crimson gown that demanded attention, her lips curled in a knowing smile every time their eyes met. The wife's stomach twisted, but she held her composure, sitting taller, her hands gently folded over her belly as though reminding herself of what truly mattered. Later, when conversation with donors and partners consumed the crowd, she noticed her husband slip away, his hand brushing against his cufflink like a secret signal. Her breath caught. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay seated, she followed, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she trailed him through a side corridor. The voices reached her before she turned the corner. "I can't stand another minute of this facade," he muttered, his voice low but laced with hunger. The mistress's laughter answered, soft and cruel. "Poor thing. Parading her around like a trophy while you're dying to be with me. Doesn't she realize how pathetic she looks?" The words were knives. The wife pressed her back against the wall, her nails digging into her palm as she struggled not to make a sound. She had suspected, even known, but hearing it aloud, unfiltered and dripping with disdain, was like being gutted. "She's weak," the mistress continued. "Pregnant, fragile, boring. You deserve better. Soon," he whispered. "She won't matter. Only you will." The wife's vision blurred, her heart hammering in her chest. She staggered back into the hall before either of them could see her, her breaths shallow and ragged. Returning to the ballroom felt like walking into fire. She tried to steady herself, but her face betrayed her, ashen, lips pressed tight, eyes glistening. Guests noticed. Whispers began, subtle at first, then growing louder, rippling through the crowd like sparks catching flame. "Did you see her face? She looks ill. No, something's wrong. Look, he's gone again." She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. The cameras caught it, freezing her humiliation in stark flashes. Every murmur in the room became deafening, every glance a spotlight on her pain. The mistress soon reappeared, her gown swaying like victory, her smirk unashamed. And though no one spoke openly, the implication was clear. The whispers weren't just about suspicion anymore, they were about certainty. Standing in the center of the ballroom, her husband's absence screaming louder than any accusation, the wife's composure began to crack. She clutched her stomach, her face pale as stone, but she refused to crumble in front of them. Yet in that moment, surrounded by opulence and betrayal, she knew the truth had shifted from secret to spectacle. The private wound had become a public humiliation, and there was no hiding from it anymore. The weight of the whispers lingered long after the gala ended. Back in the cold vastness of the mansion, silence pressed in on her like a suffocating fog. She tried to steady her breathing, to convince herself that she could endure it, that she could keep standing tall no matter how broken she felt inside. But her body betrayed her. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, her chest tightened as if invisible chains wrapped around her lungs, and a sudden wave of dizziness forced her to grip the edge of the table for balance. Her heart pounded erratically, every beat echoing her anguish. The room spun. She stumbled toward the staircase, but her legs gave way beneath her, sending her crumpling to the floor. The last thing she remembered before the darkness overtook her was her hand pressed desperately against her belly, whispering, "Hold on, please." When she opened her eyes, harsh hospital lights greeted her, and the sterile scent of disinfectant filled her nose. A doctor stood at her bedside, his expression grave but compassionate. "You're stable now," he said gently, "but the stress is taking a severe toll on both you and the baby. If this continues, there could be complications." The words cut through her fog, sharp and sobering. For a moment, tears threatened to spill, but then a stronger feeling rose, resolve. She turned her head toward the monitor that tracked the tiny heartbeat of her unborn child. The steady rhythm became her anchor, her reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. Her father sat quietly in the corner, his eyes heavy with worry but his posture firm, like an unspoken promise that she wasn't alone. The sight of him gave her strength. For the first time, she realized she couldn't afford to keep enduring silently. The life of her child depended on her choices now. Clutching her belly with renewed determination, she whispered a vow only she and her baby could hear. "I'll protect us. No matter what it takes." The father had built his empire on patience and precision, and now those same qualities guided him as he prepared to strike back. In public, he remained the composed patriarch, visiting his daughter in the hospital, speaking softly to reassure her, projecting calm to the world. But behind closed doors, he was a storm-gathering force. The betrayal of his daughter was not just a personal wound, it was an insult to his legacy, his family's honor. And unlike the emotional cruelty of his son-in-law, his retaliation would not be rash. It would be deliberate, methodical, and devastating. He began by summoning his most trusted circle, lawyers whose names carried weight in courtrooms, investigators who specialized in uncovering what others thought buried, and financial experts who knew how to dismantle empires from the inside out. They gathered around his mahogany desk in a private study, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across maps of companies, bank statements, and photographs. Every piece of information about the millionaire's business dealings was laid bare, every questionable transaction circled in red. "This will not be quick," the father said, his voice steady. "And it will not be loud. It will be precise. Every stone he stands on, we will pull from under him, until he has nothing left to balance on." The plan unfolded in layers. Legal teams began digging into contracts, identifying breaches and hidden liabilities. Investigators traced the mistress's financial connections, uncovering the ways the millionaire funneled money to sustain her lavish lifestyle. Financial experts mapped out weak points in his companies, noting where investor confidence could be shaken with the right whispers. There would be no public outburst, no direct confrontation, yet. The father understood the power of patience. A man like his son-in-law thrived on image and influence, and the most effective revenge was not to strike him once but to watch his empire rot from within, piece by piece, until he had no refuge left. The father's calm mask never slipped as he orchestrated this silent war. To his daughter, he remained her pillar, urging her to focus on healing and protecting her unborn child. But in the shadows, he sharpened his weapons of power and influence. Unlike the cruelty his son-in-law had wielded, his justice would carry no chaos, it would carry inevitability. And when the final blow came, it would not just ruin a man. It would erase the illusion of strength he had built, leaving nothing but disgrace in its place. The downfall began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like hairline cracks in glass. At first, it was a single business partner who withdrew from a joint venture, citing strategic differences. Then another contract dissolved without warning, the terms suddenly unenforceable thanks to subtle legal maneuvers orchestrated by the father's team. By the time the millionaire noticed, the web of his empire had already begun to unravel. The media caught wind next. Headlines screamed with scandal, fueled by carefully timed leaks that exposed questionable deals, offshore accounts, and bribes hidden behind shell companies. The image he had cultivated for years, that of a polished, untouchable mogul, was stripped away in a matter of weeks. Reporters who once praised him now circled like vultures, their cameras hungry for each grim expression, each moment of weakness. Investors, ever fickle, were the first to flee. Stocks tied to his ventures plummeted as confidence evaporated. Banks grew wary, freezing lines of credit and demanding audits. Board members who had once toasted him at lavish dinners now refused to return his calls, fearful that association with him might taint their own reputations. The walls of his empire, built so proudly, began closing in with every passing day. The mistress, once draped in jewels and luxury, began to see the shift as well. Her dinners were no longer in five-star restaurants. The gifts stopped arriving at her doorstep. Whispers in society circles painted her as complicit, her reputation unraveling alongside his. Fear crept into her perfectly painted smile. The final straw came when she realized his fortune was not just slipping, it was collapsing. And with that, her loyalty dissolved. She vanished almost overnight, leaving behind nothing but a cruel reminder of his foolish devotion. For the first time in years, his arrogance faltered. In private, desperation replaced bravado. He raged at assistants, threatened lawyers, and paced sleepless nights in rooms that suddenly felt too large, too empty. His reflection in the mirror no longer showed a powerful man, but one cornered, fragile, and unraveling. The irony was inescapable. He had thought himself untouchable, but every string being pulled against him was invisible, precise, and unstoppable. He could not fight back because he didn't know where the blows were coming from. Each loss chipped away not only at his fortune but at the identity he had built around it. The man who once told his wife she was nothing without him now faced the bitter truth. Without his empire, without his mistress, without his carefully constructed facade, he was the one with nothing. And the world was watching. Healing did not happen overnight. The wife, though fragile from the storm she had endured, found her strength in the soft cries and steady heartbeat of her newborn child. Every glance at the baby reminded her that she had something worth fighting for, something pure and untainted by betrayal. The hospital walls that once echoed her fears now became the first place where she reclaimed herself. She decided, firmly and without hesitation, that she would no longer live under the shadow of a man who had torn her apart. Divorce was not just a legal step, it was her rebirth. With her father by her side, the process was swift and uncompromising. Papers were drawn, settlements finalized, and custody secured entirely in her favor. The millionaire's pleas fell on deaf ears. His fall from grace had stripped him of the arrogance that once allowed him to tower over her. In those meetings, for the first time, she spoke not as a timid wife but as a woman who had found her voice. Every signature she placed on those documents was not just ink, it was liberation. In the months that followed, she began to rebuild. The lavish mansions and glittering galas no longer defined her. Instead, she crafted a new identity, rooted in resilience. She turned her pain into purpose, standing on stages and in interview chairs, telling her story, not for sympathy, but to light the way for women who had suffered in silence. Her words carried power because they were raw, lived, and unfiltered. The public, once pitying her, began to admire her as a symbol of strength. She was no longer the woman whose life was shattered by an overheard call. She was a survivor, a mother, and a voice for justice. In her rebirth, she showed the world that dignity, once reclaimed, can shine brighter than any fortune. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, without the flashing lights of reporters or the roar of a gala crowd. The millionaire, once the symbol of wealth and arrogance, appeared at her doorstep looking nothing like the man she once called her husband. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow, and his confidence, the shield he had worn so proudly, was gone. He stood with trembling hands, not holding gifts or promises, but desperation. For the first time, he begged. He asked her to listen, to believe that he regretted everything. He spoke of mistakes, of loneliness, of nights haunted by the mistress who had long abandoned him and the empire that had crumbled in his grasp. His words were soaked in sorrow, but she heard only the echoes of betrayal. Every whispered promise he made to another woman, every cruel word he hurled at her during her pregnancy, every public humiliation, it all replayed in her mind as he pleaded. She stood calm, her child resting peacefully in the next room, her father beside her like a pillar of unshakable strength. This time, she did not cry, did not tremble. She looked him in the eye and told him what he had destroyed could never be rebuilt. Forgiveness was not hers to give, because his actions had already written their own legacy, one of regret, disgrace, and loneliness. Her father, silent but fierce, made sure the man knew he would never again rise to power. The networks were closed, the investors long gone, and the doors of influence sealed shut. The millionaire who once commanded boardrooms was now a cautionary tale whispered at business tables. A man who lost everything not to competition, but to his own arrogance and cruelty. As he left, shoulders slumped and heart heavy, he carried only regret. Meanwhile, inside that home, the wife embraced her child and her future. Her life was no longer defined by his betrayal, but by her resilience. She had emerged from the ashes stronger, admired, and free. The story closed not with his redemption, but with her triumph, his downfall serving as a reminder that power without loyalty, love, and respect is only an illusion.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.